Alexander Chen stared at his phone screen for the 10th time that morning, watching his mother's missed calls pile up. He knew exactly what she wanted to discuss, and he wasn't ready for another round of the same conversation they'd been having for months. "Beta, you're 32 now," his mother had said during their last dinner together. "All your cousins are married with children. What are you waiting for? Some perfect Bollywood actress to fall from the sky?" Alexander ran his hands through his hair and finally picked up when she called again. "Hi, Mom. Alexander, finally. I was beginning to think something happened to you," she said in that worried tone that always made him feel guilty. "Your father and I have been talking, and we found the perfect girl for you." Here it comes, he thought. Alexander had built his software company from nothing and sold it for $47 million by age 30. He owned 3 properties, drove cars that cost more than most people's houses, and had been featured on magazine covers as one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Yet somehow, none of that mattered to his traditional Indian parents. In their eyes, he was still an incomplete man without a wife. "Mom, we've talked about this. I'm not ready for marriage right now. The new company is just getting started, and I need to focus. I'll focus, always focus on work," she interrupted. "What about focusing on your family? Your happiness? Your future children?" Alexander loved his parents deeply. They had immigrated to America with nothing, worked multiple jobs to put him through college, and celebrated every one of his achievements as if it were their own. But their old-world expectations felt suffocating sometimes. "Her name is Maya Sharma," his mother continued without waiting for his response. "Very nice family from Bangalore. The father is a respected engineer, mother is a teacher, and Maya herself is very educated. She has a PhD in something scientific. Very intelligent girl. Mom, you know I can find someone on my own, right? I meet plenty of people." "Yes, I know about the kind of people you meet," she said with disapproval. "Those party girls who only want your money. This is different. This is about finding a life partner, someone from a good family who shares our values." Alexander had heard this argument countless times. His parents had never quite understood his lifestyle or the women he occasionally dated. To them, anyone who wasn't Indian and from a traditional family was automatically suspicious. "Just meet her once," his mother pleaded. "What's the harm in meeting? If you don't like each other, that's fine, but at least give it a chance." 3 weeks later, Alexander found himself sitting in his parents' living room, wearing the traditional kurta his mother had insisted upon, waiting to meet Maya and her family. He felt ridiculous, like he was playing dress-up in someone else's life. When the Sharma family arrived, Alexander's first thought was relief. At least they seemed normal. Maya's father had a firm handshake and talked intelligently about technology trends. Her mother was warm and funny, immediately complimenting his mother's cooking. Then he saw Maya. She was sitting quietly in the corner, wearing a simple salwar kameez that looked like it had been picked specifically to hide her figure. Her thick glasses dominated her face, and her hair was pulled back so severely it looked painful. She kept her eyes down, occasionally nodding when the adult spoke, but never volunteering anything herself. Alexander tried to be polite, but he couldn't help feeling disappointed. This wasn't about looks. He'd dated plenty of women who weren't conventionally beautiful but had something special about them, some spark or confidence that drew him in. Maya just seemed absent. "Why don't you 2 young people go to the garden and talk?" his mother suggested with the subtlety of a bulldozer. They walked outside in awkward silence. Alexander tried to start conversations, but Maya's responses were minimal. "So you're doing a PhD? That's impressive. What's your research about?" "Biochemistry," she said without looking at him. "That must be interesting. Are you working on anything specific?" "Yes." He waited for her to elaborate, but she didn't. It was like trying to have a conversation with a wall. "Do you enjoy it? The research, I mean." Maya finally looked at him, but her expression was completely neutral. "It's fine." Alexander felt like he was failing some test he didn't understand. Was she shy, uninterested, or just as uncomfortable with this whole situation as he was? "Listen," he said, stopping by his mother's rose bushes. "I know this is weird for both of us. Our parents setting us up like we're still living in the 1950s or something. You don't have to pretend to be interested if you're not." For a moment, something flickered across Maya's face. Surprise, maybe? But then the blank expression returned. "I'm not pretending anything," she said quietly. They returned to the living room, where both sets of parents were clearly trying to look like they hadn't been discussing wedding plans. Alexander caught his mother's hopeful glance and felt the familiar weight of expectation. Over the next few meetings, things didn't improve much. Maya remained polite but distant. She never asked about his business, never showed interest in his hobbies, never even seemed curious about his life. When he offered to take her to a nice restaurant, she suggested they just walk around a nearby park instead. When he mentioned his love for traveling, she simply nodded. "She's very traditional," his mother explained after Maya's third visit. "Not like these modern girls who are always on their phones talking about themselves. She's humble, focused on serious things. That's good for marriage," but Alexander wasn't convinced. He'd expected some connection, some sign that they could at least be friends. Instead, he felt like he was meeting a stranger every time. The pressure from both families intensified. Maya's parents mentioned they'd had other proposals but were waiting to hear from the Chens. His own parents started talking about auspicious dates and venue bookings. "Beta, she's perfect for you," his father said one evening. "Educated, from good family, won't give you any drama. What more do you want?" Alexander wanted to say he wanted someone who challenged him, who made him laugh, who had dreams and opinions and passion for something. But he looked at his parents' faces and saw how much this meant to them. "She seems nice," he said carefully. "Nice? She's wonderful," his mother exclaimed. "And did you see how she helped me in the kitchen last time without being asked? Very cultured girl. She'll make an excellent wife." The word wife hit him strangely. This quiet, seemingly plain woman was going to be his wife. They'd share a home, a life together. The thought felt surreal, but family honor was everything in his parents' world. And Maya wasn't terrible, she was just ordinary. Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe he'd been chasing excitement when what he really needed was stability. 3 months after that first meeting, Alexander found himself saying yes to the marriage proposal. Maya had apparently agreed as well, though she'd shown about as much enthusiasm as someone agreeing to a dental appointment. As he shook hands with Maya's father to seal the arrangement, Alexander caught her eye across the room. For just a second, he thought he saw something there. But then she looked away, and he decided he'd imagined it. He had no idea that his quiet, unremarkable bride-to-be was hiding secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about marriage, love, and the power of first impressions. The wedding day arrived faster than Alexander had expected. 3 months of planning had felt both like forever and no time at all. Standing in the ornately decorated hotel ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of guests from both families, he felt like an actor in someone else's movie. Maya looked exactly as he'd predicted she would. Her wedding lehenga was beautiful. His mother had insisted on the best. But somehow Maya managed to make even the elaborate red and gold outfit look understated. Her hair was styled traditionally with flowers and jewelry, yet she still seemed to fade into the background somehow. While other brides glowed with excitement or nervousness, Maya just looked present, like she was going through the motions just as much as he was. During the ceremony, as they circled the sacred fire 7 times, Alexander caught glimpses of Maya's face. She was focused straight ahead, never once looking at him or smiling. When it came time to put the Mangal Sutra around her neck, her expression didn't change at all. Most brides he'd seen in movies or at other weddings showed some emotion, joy, nervousness, even tears. Maya could have been attending someone else's wedding for all the feelings she showed. "You may now touch her feet and seek her blessings," the priest announced, referring to an old tradition. Alexander knelt awkwardly, feeling ridiculous. When he looked up at Maya, she was staring somewhere over his head, her face completely blank. The reception was worse. While Alexander mingled with guests, shaking hands and accepting congratulations he didn't feel he deserved, Maya sat quietly at the head table. She smiled politely when people approached her, answered questions with brief responses, and barely touched her food. Alexander's college friends kept asking him how he felt, if he was happy when they were going on their honeymoon. He found himself giving vague answers and changing the subject. "She seems nice," his best friend David whispered during a quiet moment. "Very calm." "Yeah," Alexander replied, watching Maya carefully fold her napkin for the 3rd time. "Calm." The first week of married life was awkward beyond anything Alexander had imagined. They'd agreed that Maya would move into his penthouse apartment. It was bigger than her small rental. and his parents had insisted that the wife should live in her husband's home. But having her there felt like having a very polite stranger as a houseguest. Maya woke up early every morning and made breakfast. Not elaborate meals, just simple food, toast, eggs, tea. She never asked what he preferred or tried to make conversation while they ate. She'd sit across from him at the kitchen island, reading something on her phone, occasionally looking up to ask if he needed more tea. "You don't have to cook for me every day," he told her on the third morning. "I usually just grab coffee and a bagel on my way to work." "It's no trouble," she replied, not looking up from her phone. "But if you want to sleep in, or if you have early meetings, I wake up early anyway." That was it. End of conversation. Alexander found himself studying her face, trying to figure out what she was thinking. But Maya's expression never revealed anything. When he offered to show her around the apartment properly, pointing out the home theater system, the rooftop garden, the wine collection he was proud of, Maya nodded politely but didn't seem impressed or even interested. She asked practical questions like where the laundry room was and which bathroom she should use, but never commented on the luxury around her. "There's a spa downstairs in the building," he mentioned one evening, "and a gym. You can use any of the amenities whenever you want." "Thank you," Maya said, then went back to reading her book. Alexander tried a different approach. "Maybe this weekend we could go shopping? Get you some things for the apartment. Make it feel more like your home too?" Maya looked up from her book, some thick scientific journal he couldn't even pronounce the title of. "I don't need anything. It doesn't have to be practical stuff. We could go to the mall, get some clothes, maybe see a movie. I don't really like shopping." "Okay, what about a nice restaurant? There's this place downtown that has amazing Italian food. I prefer eating at home." Alexander felt like he was hitting a wall every time he tried to connect with her. He'd married women before, well, dated them seriously, and there had always been some shared interests, some common ground to build on. Maya seemed to have no interest beyond her work and her books. The books were everywhere. Thick, academic-looking volumes with titles like Advanced Molecular Biology and Biochemical Engineering Principles. Maya read constantly, during breakfast, in the evenings even while walking around the apartment. When Alexander tried to make conversation about what she was reading, she'd give him brief, technical explanations that made it clear the subject was way over his head. "Working on something interesting?" he asked one evening, noticing she'd been scribbling notes in a journal while reading. "Just keeping up with current research," she said without looking up. "Must be pretty cutting-edge stuff if you're taking notes at home." Maya glanced at him with what might have been surprise. "It's just how I process information." Alexander waited for her to elaborate, but she didn't. The silence stretched until he gave up and turned on the TV. After 2 weeks of this, Alexander began staying later at the office. Not because he had urgent work, but because going home felt more awkward than staying in familiar territory. When he did come home, Maya would be reading or cooking something simple. She'd ask if he wanted dinner, serve it without much conversation, then return to her books. He started traveling more, accepting business trips he might have delegated before. When he told Maya he'd be in Seattle for 3 days, she just nodded and said she'd see him when he got back. No questions about his work, no complaints about being left alone, no interest in coming with him. "How's married life treating you?" David asked during lunch one day. Alexander pushed his salad around his plate. "It's fine, just fine." "Dude, you've been married for a month. Shouldn't you still be in the honeymoon phase?" "Maya's very independent," Alexander said carefully. "She doesn't need much attention." "That's good, I guess. Better than someone who's clingy?" "Yeah, it's good, but it didn't feel good." Alexander had expected some kind of adjustment period, maybe some awkwardness while they got to know each other better. He hadn't expected to feel like he was living alone with a roommate who happened to share his last name. Maya never asked about his day, never wanted to know about his business deals or travel plans. She never complained when he worked late or went out with friends. She never asked for anything. Not money, not attention, not even basic companionship. Most frustrating of all, she never seemed unhappy with the arrangement. While Alexander felt increasingly isolated in his own home, Maya appeared perfectly content with their separate lives. She had her routines, her books, her work, and seemed to need nothing else. One evening, Alexander came home to find Maya cooking dinner as usual. The apartment smelled amazing, but when he complimented the food, she just thanked him and continued eating in silence, looking at his wife across the dinner table, this quiet, undemanding woman who seemed to have no expectations or desires beyond basic politeness. Alexander made a decision. If Maya was content to live like polite strangers, then that's exactly what they'd do. He'd stop trying to force conversations or connections that clearly weren't wanted. He'd be a respectful roommate and a decent husband on paper, and they could both live their separate lives in peace. He had no idea how wrong he was about everything. 2 months into their marriage, Alexander had settled into what he thought was their new normal. He'd wake up, find breakfast waiting for him, exchange polite small talk with Maya, then head to work. She'd be reading when he came home. They'd have dinner with minimal conversation and then retreat to their separate routines. It wasn't the marriage he'd dreamed of, but it was peaceful. Then the phone calls started. The first time Alexander noticed, he was working late in his home office when he heard Maya's voice from the living room. That wasn't unusual. She occasionally talked to her parents or colleagues. But something about her tone made him pause. She sounded different, more animated than he'd ever heard her. He couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm of her speech was faster, more confident. When he emerged from his office 20 minutes later, Maya was back to her usual quiet self, reading on the couch. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I heard you on a call." "Just work," she said without looking up from her book. The second time it happened, Alexander was in the kitchen getting a late-night snack when he heard Maya's voice from her bedroom. Again, that same animated tone, completely different from her usual monotone responses to him. This time he caught a few words as he passed by her door, something about market projections and quarterly analysis. Strange. Maya was a biochemist, wasn't she? Why would she be discussing market projections? When he asked her about it the next morning, Maya just shrugged. "Conference call with some research collaborators. We were discussing funding." That made sense, Alexander supposed. Research projects needed funding, and funding involved financial discussions. He let it go, but the calls became more frequent. Always behind closed doors, always in that confident, animated voice he never heard when she spoke to him. And they happened at odd hours, sometimes as late as midnight, sometimes as early as 6 in the morning. "Don't you think it's a bit inconsiderate for your colleagues to call so late?" Alexander asked one evening after hearing Maya talking until nearly 1 a.m. "Time zones," Maya said simply. "International collaborations." "Oh, where are your collaborators based?" Maya hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Various places. Europe, Asia. You know how academic research works. It's global now." Alexander didn't know how academic research worked, actually, but Maya's explanation seemed reasonable. Still, something nagged at him. Then the packages started arriving. The first one came on a Tuesday morning. Alexander was leaving for work when the doorman handed him a sleek black box addressed to Maya. It was heavier than he'd expected and had no return address. Just a logo he didn't recognize, something that looked expensive and minimalist. "Package for you," he told Maya, setting it on the kitchen counter. Maya's reaction was subtle but immediate. Her eyes widened slightly and she moved toward the package faster than he'd ever seen her move. "Oh, thank you. I'll take care of this." She picked up the box and headed toward her bedroom before Alexander could say anything else. He heard her door close firmly. More packages followed over the next few weeks. Always that same sleek, expensive-looking packaging. Always Maya's immediate, almost protective reaction. She never opened them when Alexander was around, and if he asked about them, she'd give vague responses about work supplies or research materials. But what kind of research materials came in packaging that looked like it belonged in a luxury boutique? Alexander's curiosity really piqued on a Saturday afternoon when he came home early from a golf game. He'd forgotten his phone charger and needed to grab it before meeting friends for dinner. As he walked through the living room, he noticed Maya's laptop was open on the coffee table. She wasn't in the room. He could hear water running in the kitchen, so he glanced at the screen as he passed by. What he saw made him stop dead. The screen showed what looked like a complex financial dashboard. Charts, graphs, numbers that meant nothing to him but looked important. Stock symbols, he realized. Market data. The kind of sophisticated trading interface he'd seen on visits to investment firms. Alexander stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There were multiple windows open, showing what appeared to be different portfolios or accounts. The numbers were significant. He caught sight of figures in the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. "Did you find your charger?" Alexander spun around, his heart jumping. Maya was standing in the doorway, holding a cup of tea, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Yeah, just grabbed it," he said, holding up the charger. "Sorry, I didn't mean to look at your computer. I just noticed it was open and—" "It's fine," Maya said, but she moved quickly to close the laptop. "Just some data analysis for my research." "That looked pretty sophisticated for biochemistry research," Alexander said, trying to keep his tone casual. Maya paused, the laptop halfway closed. "Modern research involves a lot of statistical analysis, financial modeling for cost-benefit studies. It's all interconnected now." Again, her explanation sounded plausible, but something about the way she'd closed the laptop so quickly, the way she'd positioned herself between him and the computer, didn't feel right. Alexander began paying more attention to the little things, like how Maya moved around the apartment when she thought he wasn't watching. Gone was the hesitant, almost shuffling walk she used when they were directly interacting. Instead, she moved with purpose and grace, like someone accustomed to command and confidence. He noticed her vocabulary, too. During their usual brief conversations, Maya stuck to simple responses and basic words. But sometimes, when she was distracted or thinking out loud, more sophisticated language would slip out. "The implementation strategy needs to be more robust," he heard her mutter one evening while reading some papers. When she realized he was listening, she immediately went quiet. Another time, she was on one of her mysterious phone calls, and he heard her say something about leveraging synergies in the pharmaceutical vertical. That didn't sound like the language of a laboratory researcher. And then there were her habits. Maya claimed to prefer simple home cooking over restaurants. But Alexander noticed she knew exactly how to properly taste wine. Not just drink it, but swirl, sniff, and evaluate it like someone with serious training. When he'd ordered expensive sushi delivery one evening, she'd eaten it with perfect chopstick technique and had commented knowledgeably about the quality of the fish. "You seem to know a lot about sushi," he'd observed. "I lived in Japan for a while during my studies," Maya had replied. But later, when he'd asked her about her time there, she'd been vague and changed the subject quickly. The strangest incident happened on a Thursday evening when Alexander came home to find Maya in the kitchen, but not cooking this time. She was standing by the window talking on her phone in what sounded like fluent French. Her posture was completely different, shoulders back, chin raised, gesturing expressively with her free hand. She looked powerful, confident, nothing like the quiet, almost invisible woman who usually inhabited their apartment. When she noticed him watching, Maya quickly ended the call and reverted to her usual posture. "Sorry, work call," she said in English, her voice back to its usual quiet tone. "I didn't know you spoke French," Alexander said. "Just a little. Academic conferences, you know." But that had definitely been more than a little. Maya had been speaking rapidly and fluently, discussing what sounded like complex business matters. Alexander was starting to feel like he was living with a puzzle he couldn't solve. Every explanation Maya gave made sense individually, but together they painted a picture that didn't quite fit. Research collaborators in different time zones, international conference calls, financial modeling for cost-benefit analysis, time in Japan, fluent French. It all added up to someone far more worldly and sophisticated than the simple laboratory researcher she claimed to be. But what was the alternative? That his quiet, unremarkable wife was deliberately deceiving him about who she was? That seemed impossible. Maya barely showed interest in anything beyond her books and work. She never asked for money, never wanted to go anywhere expensive, never seemed to care about luxury or status. Still, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Maya wasn't telling him, something big. He just had no idea how big. Alexander stared at his phone in frustration as he sat in the airport lounge. His 3-day business trip to Chicago had just been cut short after barely 6 hours. The client meeting that was supposed to happen tomorrow had been canceled due to a family emergency, and the follow-up meetings for the rest of the week were now pointless. "Flight 447 to your gate is now ready for boarding," the announcement echoed through the terminal. He hadn't even unpacked at the hotel. Now he was heading home a full 2 days early, on a Tuesday evening instead of Thursday night. Alexander thought about calling Maya to let her know, then decided against it. She never seemed particularly interested in his travel schedule anyway, and surprising her might be, well, it wouldn't be much of a surprise given how little she seemed to care about his comings and goings. During the 2-hour flight home, Alexander found himself thinking about their strange marriage more than usual. 3.5 months in, and he felt like he knew Maya less now than when they'd first met. If anything, she'd become more mysterious, not less. The taxi dropped him off at his building just after 8 p.m. Alexander nodded to the doorman and headed up to his penthouse, rolling his small suitcase behind him. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, and he realized he was actually nervous about seeing Maya unexpectedly. How sad was that? Nervous to surprise his own wife. As he approached his front door, Alexander could hear voices from inside. Maya was talking to someone, probably another one of those mysterious work calls she'd been having more frequently. He fumbled with his keys trying to be quiet. Maybe he could get inside and settled without interrupting her. The door opened silently and Alexander stepped into his foyer. Maya's voice was coming from the direction of the living room, but it sounded different again, stronger, more authoritative than he'd ever heard it. He set down his suitcase carefully and listened. The Q3 numbers exceeded projections by 18%, Maya was saying. I want to accelerate the timeline for Phase 2 implementation. We're looking at a potential market capture of 42 million if we move fast. Alexander frowned. That definitely didn't sound like biochemistry research talk, and Maya's voice had a commanding quality he'd never heard before, like someone used to being in charge of important decisions. He moved quietly toward the living room, curiosity overriding his usual politeness about her privacy. As he got closer, he could see the glow of Maya's laptop screen reflecting off the walls. The Singapore team needs to coordinate with Frankfurt before we finalize anything, Maya continued. I don't care if it means working over the weekend. We have a 2-week window to execute this properly. Alexander reached the entrance to the living room and stopped dead. What he saw made him question whether he was in the right apartment. The woman sitting at his dining table, facing away from him toward the laptop screen, looked nothing like his wife. Her hair wasn't pulled back in its usual severe style. Instead, it fell in loose, elegant waves past her shoulders. She was wearing a fitted black blazer that looked expensive and professional, nothing like the simple clothes Maya usually wore around the apartment. But it was her posture that struck him most. This woman sat like she owned the room, shoulders back, leaning forward with the confidence of someone in complete control. Everything about her body language screamed authority and success. Dr. Sharma Patel, do you want to review the acquisition targets before Thursday's board meeting? A voice from the laptop asked. Send me the full analysis tonight, Maya replied without hesitation. I'll need the financial projections, risk assessments, and competitive landscape reports. And make sure the legal team has reviewed all the regulatory implications. Alexander's mind reeled. Dr. Sharma Patel, acquisition targets, board meetings? His quiet, book-reading wife was talking like a CEO. But that wasn't even the biggest shock. As Maya turned slightly to reach for some papers on the table, Alexander caught his first clear glimpse of her profile, and his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful. Stunningly, remarkably beautiful. Without the thick glasses that usually dominated her face, without the severe hairstyle and shapeless clothes, Maya was transformed into someone completely different. Her features, which had always seemed plain and unremarkable, were actually elegant and refined. Her skin was flawless, her bone structure sophisticated. She moved with the grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. Alexander felt like he was looking at a stranger. The pharmaceutical division is performing beyond expectations, Maya continued, gesturing at the screen with the confidence of someone presenting to a boardroom. Revenue is up 34% year over year, and we're tracking to hit our annual targets by Q3. Pharmaceutical division? Maya worked in pharmaceutical companies, but she told him she was just a researcher, someone who spent her days in a laboratory running tests and writing papers. What about the biotech startup we've been evaluating? The voice from the laptop asked. I want to move forward with the acquisition, Maya said decisively. They have 2 patents that would complement our existing portfolio perfectly. Offer them $28 million initially, but I'm willing to go up to 35 if they negotiate hard. $28 million? Alexander's head was spinning. His wife was casually discussing spending more money on a single acquisition than he'd made from his first startup. Dr. Sharma Patel, there's one more item. The voice continued. The Wall Street Journal wants to interview you about the market expansion strategy. Should I schedule it for next week? Not yet, Maya replied. I'm still maintaining a low profile for personal reasons. Tell them I'll consider it in a few months. Personal reasons. What personal reasons could Maya possibly have for avoiding publicity? As if sensing his presence, Maya suddenly stopped talking. Alexander watched as her entire body went rigid, her shoulders tensing. Slowly, very slowly, she turned around. The moment their eyes met, Alexander saw something he'd never seen in Maya's face before. Complete and total shock, followed immediately by what looked like panic. For several seconds, they just stared at each other across the living room. Maya's laptop was still glowing, the conference call still ongoing, but she seemed frozen in place. Dr. Sharma Patel, are you still there? The voice from the computer asked. Maya's eyes never left Alexander's face as she leaned toward the laptop. I need to reschedule this call, she said, her voice sounding strained for the first time. Something urgent has come up. Of course. Should we reconvene tomorrow morning? I'll let you know, Maya said and closed the laptop with a sharp click. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stood in the doorway, still holding his keys, trying to process what he just witnessed. Maya remained seated at the table, but now she looked trapped, like an animal caught in headlights. You're home early, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander found his voice. Who are you? Maya's carefully composed expression cracked slightly. What do you mean? I mean, Alexander said, stepping fully into the room. Who are you really? Because the woman I just watched discussing $35 million acquisitions and pharmaceutical divisions is definitely not the quiet lab researcher I married. Maya's hands were shaking slightly as she reached up to touch her hair, seeming to suddenly realize how different she looked. Alexander, I can explain. Can you? He interrupted, his shock giving way to something that felt like anger. Because I've been living with someone for 3.5 months who I thought barely cared about anything beyond her books. And now I find out you're some kind of business executive, making decisions about millions of dollars, being interviewed by the Wall Street Journal. Maya stood up slowly, and even in her obvious panic, she moved with that same confident grace he'd never seen before. Standing there in her expensive blazer with her hair loose and her face transformed, she looked like a completely different person. It's complicated, she said quietly. Complicated? Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maya, you've been lying to me about who you are since the day we met. I think I deserve a better explanation than it's complicated. Maya looked at him for a long moment, and Alexander could practically see her internal struggle. Finally, her shoulders sagged slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was resigned. Sit down, she said. There's a lot I need to tell you. Alexander sat down heavily on his own couch, feeling like a stranger in his own home. Maya remained standing by the dining table, her hands clasped in front of her. Even in her obvious distress, she carried herself with a poise he'd never noticed before. My full name is Dr. Maya Sharma Patel, she began, her voice quiet but steady. I have a PhD in biochemistry, that part was true. But I'm also the founder and CEO of 2 pharmaceutical companies. Alexander stared at her. 2 companies? Maya nodded, taking a deep breath. I started my first company when I was 25, right after finishing my doctorate. It was a small biotech firm focused on developing new cancer treatments. I sold it 3 years later for $43 million. The number hit Alexander like a physical blow. $43 million, more than he'd made from his own business sale. My second company, Maya continued, specializes in rare disease medications. We went public 2 years ago. The company is currently valued at around $200 million. Alexander's mouth went dry. $200 million? I own 60% of it, Maya said simply. Plus I have other investments, properties, various business interests. She paused, meeting his eyes. My personal net worth is approximately $57 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt like his world had tilted off its axis. His quiet, unremarkable wife was worth more than he'd ever dreamed of being. I don't understand, he said finally. Why would you hide all of this? Why would you pretend to be someone else? Maya moved to the chair across from him, sitting down carefully. Without her glasses and severe styling, her face was expressive in ways he'd never seen before. Because every relationship I'd ever had failed because of my success, she said. And for the first time since he'd known her, her voice carried real emotion. Do you know what it's like to never know if someone wants you or your money? To have men either run away because they're intimidated, or suddenly become very interested because they see dollar signs. Alexander started to speak, but Maya held up a hand. When I was 28, I dated a man for 8 months. I thought he loved me for me. When he found out about my companies, he proposed within a week. Later, I discovered he'd already started telling people he was engaged to that pharmaceutical heiress and making plans for how we'd spend my money. Maya's voice grew stronger, more confident as she continued. Another man broke up with me after 6 months because, and I quote, "I can't handle dating someone more successful than me." It's emasculating. Alexander winced. He was starting to understand, and it wasn't comfortable. So when our families arranged this marriage, Maya continued, I saw it as an opportunity, a chance to see if someone could care about me without knowing about my wealth or achievements. I wanted to find out if there was a man who could love Maya the person, not Maya the CEO. But the way you acted, Alexander protested. You were so distant, uninterested in everything. For the first time since he'd known her, Maya smiled, really smiled, not the polite, restrained expressions he was used to. I was testing you, Alexander. I wanted to see if you'd try to get to know me even when I seemed ordinary. If you'd show me kindness and respect even when you thought I had nothing special to offer. The words hit Alexander harder than any accusation could have. He thought back over their months of marriage, his increasing absence from home, his lack of interest in her work, his assumption that she was boring and had nothing to contribute to their conversations. I failed, didn't I? He said quietly. Maya's expression softened. You treated me politely. You were never mean or demanding. But you never tried to truly know me either. You saw someone you thought was plain and uninteresting, and you wrote me off. Alexander put his head in his hands. She was right. Completely, devastatingly right. The phone calls you heard, Maya continued. Those were real business meetings. The packages were designer clothes and documents I needed for work. I've been running my companies from here, maintaining all my responsibilities while pretending to be someone I'm not. That must have been exhausting, Alexander said, looking up at her. It was, Maya admitted. Especially because... She hesitated, then continued. Especially because I started to like you more than I expected to. Alexander's heart jumped. You did? You're kinder than you think you are, Maya said. You never raised your voice or made demands. You gave me space when I seemed to want it. You offered to take me places even when I kept declining. You were frustrated with our marriage, but you never took it out on me. But it wasn't enough, Alexander said. No, Maya said gently. It wasn't. Because kindness without genuine interest isn't love. You were a good roommate, Alexander, but you weren't a husband. They sat in silence for several minutes. Alexander felt like he was seeing not just Maya clearly for the first time, but himself as well. And what he saw wasn't pretty. I had already decided to ask for a divorce, Maya said quietly. I was planning to do it next week, actually. I was going to tell you the truth and then end things quietly. Alexander's chest tightened. Had decided? Past tense? Maya studied his face carefully. Your reaction tonight surprised me. How so? You're not angry about the money, she said. Most men would be furious that their wife had been lying about being wealthy. They'd either feel tricked or start calculating what they could gain from it. But you just seem confused. Hurt maybe, but not angry about the wealth itself. Alexander considered this. She was right. The money was shocking. But what really bothered him was that he'd been so wrong about who she was. I don't care about your money, he said. I mean, I care that you felt you couldn't trust me with the truth, but the actual wealth? That's yours. You earned it. Something shifted in Maya's expression. See, that's what I mean. That reaction right there is why I'm willing to consider giving this another chance. Alexander's head snapped up. Another chance? Maya leaned forward slightly. I've spent 3.5 months being someone I'm not. You've spent the same time married to someone who wasn't really there. What if we started over? For real this time? I mean, what if you got to know the real Maya, the one who built companies from nothing, who speaks 4 languages, who loves traveling and trying new restaurants and discussing business strategies, the one who actually has opinions and dreams and ambitions? Alexander felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in months. genuine curiosity about his wife. And what if I got to know the real Alexander? Maya continued, not the frustrated husband trying to make conversation with someone who was deliberately giving him nothing to work with, but the man who built a successful company, who clearly has intelligence and drive of his own. You'd want that? Alexander asked. Even after I failed your test so completely? Maya was quiet for a moment. You didn't fail because you're a bad person, Alexander. You failed because you made assumptions. We both did. I assumed you'd be like every other man I'd met. You assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be. What if we both try again, without assumptions this time? Alexander looked at this woman who was his wife but felt like a complete stranger. Beautiful, successful, confident, and apparently willing to give their marriage a real chance. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. Maya smiled, that genuine, radiant smile he'd never seen before. Then let me properly introduce myself. Hi, I'm Maya. I'm a pharmaceutical CEO, I love sushi and French wine, and I've been dying to have a real conversation with someone for months. Alexander stood up and extended his hand. Hi, Maya. I'm Alexander, and I think I've been married to a stranger. I'd really like to get to know my wife.